welcome to the AVForums podcast. And joining me on this edition, games editor Mark Botwright.
This is what happens when you find a stranger in the Alps.
Movie reviewer Simon Crust.
I could be sitting at home with pea stains on my rug.
Steve Withers.
I mean, say what you want about tenants of National Socialism, dude, at least it's an ethos.
And news editor Mark Hodgkinson.
I bowl, drive around, the occasional acid flashback.
Welcome to the AVForums podcast, and we start this week with some sad news which broke on Sunday. Oscar-winning actor Philip Seymour Hoffman sadly died at the age of 46 from what is suspected, but not yet confirmed, to have been a drugs overdose. Looking back at his career, I first really noticed him in Boogie Nights, although he was in Twister the same year and playing a storm chaser, a little bit part. He was a little bit funny in that, but it was seeing him in Boogie Nights and seeing his portrayal of the character Scotty, vulnerable outcast, trying to be part of the gang, which really made me take notice of him because he managed in that role to be funny when he was trying the clothes on and he couldn't get the shirt over his belly and that kind of thing. Also at the same time being vulnerable and being a bit of an outcast. And then of course looking at his filmography, it's actually stunning the amount of quality films that he's been in, and he was a quality actor, guys.
Yeah, I first saw him in Scent of a Woman, which was the one Al Pacino was in where he won the Oscar, and he plays this really slimy school kid in it, although he looks almost identical to the way he does later in life. And then, like you, I noticed him in Twister and in Boogie Nights, where he was superb. He's done quite a few films with Paul Thomas Anderson because he had a bit part in Hard Eight, which was his first film. And then later on, he did Magnolia, where he played the nurse, nursing Tom Cruise's dying father, where he was really good again. He also appeared in Punch Drunk Love as the guy that runs the sex phone line. And then most recently, he did The Master, which he got another Oscar nomination for, which he was very good in.
Yeah, I think he's been in every Paul Thomas Anderson major release.
He wasn't in. I don't think, and I could be wrong here, but I don't think he's in There Will Be Blood. That's the only one he's not in that I'm aware of.
You're right.
But yeah, he's done almost all of the other ones. But he's been, he's one of those guys that's been in loads of films and he's always good. He's a real. I mean, I know he won an Oscar for Best Actor in Capote, but generally I would class him more as a character actor, a supporting player rather than the star. But as such, he was always really good. I mean, you can list out so many films that he pops up to and including recently playing a sort of secondary role in The Hunger Games: Catching Fire, which he was really good in as well. Even in a kind of a tweeny sci-fi movie,
I noticed
he's still really good.
I noticed you didn't say the character name there.
Yeah, Plutarch Heavenby, isn't it? Something like that.
Simon, what's your memories of Mr. Hoffman?
The overbinding memory is sort of a commitment to the art. He was very, very intense, even in the silly little roles. I'd forgotten he was in Twister. That's that silly little guy sort of jumping around on the back of everyone else there. Incredibly powerful performance. The last film I saw him in was The Master. I didn't get on with the film particularly, but my God, what a character actor he was. And it's a tragic loss. You got to wonder what goes through these people's lives. You think that he's got fame, fortune, wealth.
Well, it's addiction, and addiction takes over your life. It can happen to anybody. I mean, heroin can happen to anybody, and it's one of these things that don't touch it if you're not prepared for the consequences, because it's probably one of the strongest addictions on the planet. Even if you are wealthy, even if you are famous, even if you got everything that you could possibly ever want, once you're addicted to something, it generally takes over your life.
Very, very sad. And to be clean for 20 odd years or something tragic must have happened out of the public eye for it to turn him back into very, very sad. You wonder if he became an actor just to hide, hide a pain, be someone else. Perhaps he couldn't be someone else in the end.
Very deep, Simon.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that was surprisingly deep.
From the deep to the shallow. I kind of always think of him in Magnolia. I suppose that was the first time I really noticed him. And then when you go back, and then he's one of those faces that you suddenly realise he's popped up in so many different things, and he's also bounced around different genres as well. As much as he's kind of seems like that character actor dedicated to his craft, when you see him, The Boat That Rocked or Mission Impossible 3, he just kind of pops around. He seems to have tried his hand at various different types of role. But I think it was He's one of those figures that we'll miss simply because there aren't that many, nice way of putting it, quite unique looking, in the sense that they look like ordinary people, actors out there. It never seemed like he was pushing for the leading man role in a strange way. The kind of vulnerability that he'd bring to the supporting roles, it kind of added to the atmosphere and seemed to bring the best out of anyone acting opposite him as well. I mean, just you look at the role in something like Red Dragon. It wasn't a huge part. Okay, it's a significant part, but still, it's, he seemed to bring a certain kind of acumen to it, and it wasn't just a throwaway part either.
He's one of those guys that I didn't really know who he was. I'm not as big on movies as some of you. I didn't really know who he was until he died, and then I looked him up. And yeah, he was great in Boogie Nights, great in Big Lebowski, which both two of my favourite movies. Just a tragic thing, really. I don't know what else to say. Great actor, gone too soon. Yet another.
Big problem now is that he was in the middle of filming Hunger Games Mockingjay Parts 1 and 2, playing Plutarch Heavensby. I think they had 7 days left to shoot, so apparently they've already come out and said that they won't delay the release. So obviously they've got most of his in the can, and they can probably just fudge any scenes they hadn't shot with him.
Was it a major role?
Apparently it becomes a bit. I haven't read the books, but apparently it becomes a bigger role through the course of the next 2 films than it was in Catching Fire. But I don't think Lionsgate are in the same position that Universal are with Paul Walker's death, where they're only halfway through the film. So they were shooting parts 1 and 2 back to back. So I think he's shot most of his scenes. So I guess that'll be his last thing, won't it? So a fitting tribute, hopefully. Certainly, box office wise, it will do well because they've made nearly $1 billion off the back of Catching Fire. So
I think it'll be remembered though for Capote.
Yeah, I actually don't think. Funny enough, even though he won the Oscar for Capote, I think that Toby Jones was better.
He was better. Well, he looked more like
Truman
that
Capote,
was how you expected Capote to be. But as a kind of finding the essence of Capote, I think Hoffman nailed it.
It's just there's just so many films you forget he's in. I mean, as Phil said at the beginning. I mean, I've forgotten he's in Talented Mr. Ripley, which he's really great in. He's in Synoptic New York again, which is really good. In Charlie Wilson's War, he's great in. I think he got an Oscar nomination for that one as well. And more recently, he popped up in Ides of March and Moneyball just back in 2011, and was really good in those too. So I mean, he's done, as you said, Mark, he's done a lot of stuff and a lot of different stuff. And I can't think of a film he's in where he gives a bad performance.
No, I can't think of a bad performance, and I've got to admit or confess that I haven't seen Capote. So he's one Oscar-winning role. I haven't actually seen that yet, so I need to rectify that in the coming weeks, I think. So that's the sad loss of Philip Seymour Hoffman. I'm sure we'll all be catching up with the films that we haven't seen yet that he was in, because he was an excellent actor. So let's move on. Let's move on to home cinema news, and an event that myself and Steve were at last Wednesday, hosted at Genesis Technologies Ice Cinemas in Bracknell, and it was Datasat who were launching a new audio processor. But I think the major story from this event, Steve, was Auro 3D. And for people who don't know what Auro 3D is, it's basically an immersive surround format where they use height channels and a ceiling speaker to give a more immersive surround sound experience to films.
Yeah, that's right. It's I guess it's a competing format to Dolby Atmos, which we've discussed on a previous podcast last year, I think. And yeah, the idea is that it gives you a more immersive experience by having height and overhead speakers. Slightly different approach to the Dolby system, which first of all has a lot more overhead speakers. I mean, the Auro one has what they call a voice of God or director's voice speaker directly overhead, and their view is that that they're trying to come up with a system, and I'm quite impressed with this actually. I don't know about you, Phil, but I didn't know a lot about it before we went to see them on Wednesday. And what I was impressed by was how they thought about trying to develop something that was backwards compatible, easy to install, and relatively cheap from the point of view of the cinema chains, which kind of makes sense because the way it's delivered is using the PCM tracks. So you could, for example, very easily include Auro 13.1 on a Blu-ray just using the PCM tracks, and I thought that was quite clever because it doesn't require anything that you don't already have. You can use your existing Blu-ray player. All you basically need is a new processor and a lot more speakers and amplification, obviously.
Yeah, I mean the interesting thing is that Dolby are very much keeping Atmos in the theatrical cinema sphere. They're not going to release that, or certainly they haven't hinted that they're going to release that into the consumer market. And it works very differently to what Auro does, which, like you say, embeds the extra height channels within the normal 5.1 or 7.1 mix. And it's the processor that then recognizes it's an Auro 3D soundtrack and then decodes the extra channels. So, like you say, it's more backwards compatible. It will fit on a Blu-ray disc without changing any of the Blu-ray specs. Although they weren't telling us publicly on Wednesday which movie studios are going to support it, there is support coming. There are Blu-rays going to come this year.
Well, there are some, actually, because I did a bit of research after we got back, and there's quite, I mean, obviously DreamWorks Animation had publicly announced that they've got 15 animated films lined up with Auro 11.1 mixes. Lucasfilm, prior to its purchase by Disney, had made Red Tails, which had an Auro, which was the first film to have an Auro sound mix. Lionsgate are supporting them. So, for example, Hunger Games: Catching Fire had an Auro 11.1 mix, and the film I saw on Friday night, I, Frankenstein, which is a Lionsgate release, also has an Auro mix. So there's quite a few studios. I think Disney have done a few. So there's been definitely some support there. The big problem from our perspective in the UK is there aren't any cinemas with it yet.
Yes, so that is a problem, because if you want to hear it, you basically either have to go to Genesis Technologies and hear their system, which is a proper cinema system. They have the big Barco 4K projector. They have the whole video server setup that you get in a normal cinema. But in terms of commercial cinemas, there are orders placed, but none have been fitted out yet. There are a couple of production side rooms that have been fitted out, but nothing more than that. So the obvious question here for our listeners who are enthusiasts, who like the latest technology, is that how are you going to get the extra speakers past the significant other?
You have to stick them in the wall, aren't you? They're going to have to be in walls, I think, to make this feasible.
You know, what makes sense here is that obviously it's Datasat products that are going to have this on rollout. So they're the only products that are going to have Auro to start with. And you're talking the LS10's 10 grand, and the RS20i is 18,500. So that's out of the reach of probably 99.9% of our listeners to the podcast. It's very much for the 1% who can afford that kind of thing. And when you're talking about that kind of money and installing that kind of equipment, what you're talking about is ripping out a room within a big house and completely installing, custom installing a cinema where you can hide these speakers behind cloth walls and all that kind of thing, so they're out the way. But this technology will come down in price, and it will start to appear on consumer receivers, AVRs. Then you start getting the problem of where do you put the extra speakers, and you know, how do you get past the significant other?
Well, the point that Auro made, which was a valid one, was that you can implement the system in a piecemeal fashion, basically. So you've already got your 5.1 or 7.1 system. So you've got that past the wife. Then if you wanted to add Auro, you could go to a 9.1 system. So that would mean adding height speakers above the front left and right and rear left and right speakers. And their argument was that since there's already speakers in the corners of the room there, in those four corners of the room, then adding speakers just above them, above those speakers in the same corner, isn't as intrusive as, in fact, adding two speakers at the back in a 7.1 system, where it might be getting in the way of a doorway or the back of a room or something like that. So that is their argument. And they said, then after you've done that, if you wanted to, you could then add a height speaker above the center channel, and one, the voice of God speaker in the middle, and to get the full 11.1 setup, which is the standard that they're creating for cinemas. So you could do that way. That is one argument, I guess.
And that's one brave man.
Yeah, that's one brave man. That's great in theory, but actually trying to get past the misses would be interesting. I think.
Yeah, I think in reality, with the sort of explosion in sales of soundbars, if anything, people are going away from multi-channel audio completely. It's a lot of AV receivers aren't selling as well as they used to, and I think people are going for more simpler, less intrusive options like soundbars.
I think if you're saying that, it's more sort of general public. I think the enthusiast market, they're certainly sticking with 5.1, 7.1. I suppose if you've got a dedicated room, which not a lot of us have, but then the argument, it's easier to fit that into your system. Basically, there are solutions nowadays where you can hide speakers in the wall. You can cover them with material so they disappear within the decor. It seems to be a major point to make when we're talking about this. However, I remember back 20 years ago when people were saying you're going to put 5 speakers and a subwoofer in your living room, and we got over that hurdle. Those of us that wanted it. So I think you're right, Steve. If adding the 4 height speakers as a starting point is maybe something that, if you get something around about the size of a JBL Control 1 sort of size speaker, or one of the small Genelecs, or even some end walls, you could probably get around that issue quite easily.
Yeah, and they made the point, I guess the point they were making at one of the demonstrations, which I don't think was going down too well with a lot of the custom installers, because obviously they want to sell expensive kit. But they were saying, in your average sized room, you don't have to buy big or expensive speakers. You can get just as much impact from a small, cheap speaker, like a Control 1. You can get a pair of those for, what, 50 quid? So you could easily put some of those up in the corners and even above, in the center, and the voice of God position and above the center speaker, and have the full setup without it being too intrusive at all. And given that there are already receivers that have things like DTS Neo X, 9 channels of amplification, that kind of thing, I can't imagine it would be too difficult to implement Auro 11 or 13.1 into a higher end AV receiver.
What do the other guys think? Is this something that interests you?
Well, my first question would be, is it worth it?
No, we were going to save this till after you guys had your say on how many speakers are in the room. So can we hold? We'll hold on we'll hold on to that thought, because I don't think me and Steve are necessarily going to agree here. So let's get some more comments. We'll come back to that one.
I think you've covered pretty much all the bases there. It's things to consider would be cost, if it can be hidden within the room, or you have a dedicated room. My goal, like you guys, I know you've got them, but I would like my own dedicated cinema room, in which case, if I was doing that, I would probably go for more speakers, because you can. Yeah, the systems are in place to do that. Right here, right now, I don't think I would be bothered to it. It seems too much effort and expense for the reward that you get, and that's not even having heard it.
Yeah. So the way that the system works is, for those that are probably maybe not following the conversation here, is that you have your 5.1 setup, which is usually at ear height, surrounds a little bit higher. That's your traditional 5.1. 7.1, you obviously add your 2 speakers at the rear. What Auro does is you add height speakers. So across the front 3, you got your left, centre, right. You then have left, centre, right, high. You then have left surround high, right surround high. And if you wanted to, you could have a voice of God, which is a ceiling speaker. And the idea is to take it from one plane, which is your normal 5.1 system, and extend it up and over.
I think it's the voice of God speaker that interests me the most, getting that kind of overhead sound effect. But real immersion. That
wouldn't work with height speakers as well, because it's actually 3 layers that they talk about. So your first layer is your 5.1, then your speakers above that, then the voice of God speaker. And the whole idea behind it is that our brains work on audio cues. So when you're out in a field in the sunshine having a picnic and you hear everything around you, you don't hear it just on one plane, you hear it all around you. And that's the idea of it, is to give sound mixers the opportunity to put these audio cues in there to fool the brain into thinking that you're in a much larger space than you probably are when you're watching a movie. And then of course it can do really clever things like proper panning from behind you, overhead to the front of the screen, that kind of thing. It's supposed to be more immersive and more natural in the way that it sounds. So let's get on to how it sounds, Stephen. I'll let you go first.
Well, they gave us a demo, and what they did was they sort of went from they basically had various recordings. So they had a recording they made in a square in Amsterdam, which I think was initially a 5.1 mix, and then with some height added into it. And then they did a countryside recording, so recording in the countryside. And then that was a 9.1 mix, so they were using the height speakers but no voice of God speaker. And what they were saying was that our brains have sort of evolved to listen out for the noises at certain heights above us, but basically like the tree line, effectively. And then when the sound isn't there, we kind of put it there, but our brain has to sort of work to do that by sort of transposing the sounds to where it thinks it should be, and that makes the experience more fatiguing to listen to than it would be if the sounds were in the correct places. Now, there's no question that when we listen to the demo of the countryside record, if you closed your eyes, you were getting bird sound above where the trees would be and around you and above you and that sort of stuff, and it was all very immersive. But I found that when they turned it off, my brain just started to do that automatically, to put the sounds where they would have been. Now, maybe their argument about it being less fatiguing to listen to things that have been mixed in Auro 13.1 is true, but whilst I could hear that the sound effects, and I could close my eyes and it could be like sitting in my garden at home and hearing the birds up in the trees chirping away. It wasn't that impressive. It was more impressive in they had a scene from Red Tails, which was basically a bunch of planes dogfighting, where from where I was sat, and I was sat directly underneath one of the overhead speaker. You had the planes flying over your head. They had some stuff. Also has a couple of shots of a plane flying over you, and then 2 helicopters flying over you. And then obviously the sounds went directly overhead, and you could clearly hear that, and that was different. So I think it would benefit certain sound mixes where something involving planes or helicopters is always going to be good, and they always sound good in 5.1 as well. It would be up to the skill and the creativity of the sound designer and the nature of the film. So I don't think a kitchen sink drama is going to particularly sound any different in Auro 13.1.
You see,
than it would in 5.1.
That's where I would disagree with you, because I thought what was most effective were the demonstrations where it wasn't all boom bang special effects everywhere and all the rest of it. The most immersive for me was actually the countryside recording, which felt more natural, and I wasn't aware, or certainly wasn't as aware of the fact that there were speakers all over the room, whereas when you got a helicopter and all the rest of it, all it sounded to me was that they turned the surrounds up. It didn't have the same effect, and actually I think it had the opposite effect of what great film remixers and mixers do, which is not to take you out of the movie. The whole idea is that you get focused on the movie and you disappear into the movie, and you don't notice what's basically going on around you. You don't notice the technology. You're not counting the pixels on the screen. You're not wondering which speaker's being used and all the rest of it, because when it's done right, it draws you into the movie, and you forget about that, and you just enjoy the experience.
Yeah, true. But that was a demo, so they were deliberately showing us sound effects.
But for me, that just took me out of it. And these are movies that had been mixed in 11.1, and even though we're only getting to see like 20 seconds, 30-second clips, it didn't really impress me. All it did was I thought, well, the surrounds were turned up too loud. That was the feeling that I got from the demo. I wasn't impressed.
Okay, so this was a demo for potential cinemas, or was it a demo for the home environment? Who were they targeting?
The event was for dealers who sell data equipment. So the demo room that Genesis got, which cost about 800,000 quid, uses an RS-20i datasat processor with a 11.1 Auro setup. Now, to be fair, that system in that room is so good that if you were listening to a 7.1 mixer, it would sound amazing. So it was difficult sometimes to differentiate between how good it would have sounded anyway, just because it's such a high-end home cinema installation. So I agree with Phil to a certain extent that that some of the mixes sounded a bit busy, to the point of being distracting. And like I said earlier, I think it will come down to the creativity and skill of the sound designers to use it effectively and in a way that doesn't take you out of the film. But I can certainly see situations where having that kind of, I guess if you're a sound designer and you've got more freedom and creativity and control, and it can move sounds around in a sort of, hemisphere, like a sound umbrella over the viewer's head, that could be appealing. There's no reason why it should be restricted to 5.1, even though most films are only still mixing 5.1.
Steve, are you going to buy a 10 grand processor and then pay $3.5 to have it upgraded for Auro?
No.
And then add all the extra speakers?
No, I'm not. Partly because I haven't got the dough, partly because there's nothing to watch in it. They were a bit cagey on. What's interesting is that I think the point that we both made at the time was there's a move towards these more immersive sound systems in the cinema. You've got Dolby Atmos, you've got Auro, you've even got DTS, who just launched their own version of an objects-based sound system, which they've released for free, basically, I think, to piss off Dolby. Auro are in a good position in the sense that they don't really care if DTS or Dolby win in terms of an objects-based sound design, system, because they can still deliver, their channel-based system within the PCM tracks of DTS or Dolby's system. So they're kind of slightly agnostic in that sense. But I think in the cinema, at least, there is a move towards that, and it's for the reasons we discussed in previous podcasts about trying to make the cinema experience, big screen, 3D, although that hasn't really panned out quite the way they thought. But more immersive sound to make it more of an experience in the cinema, which can be easily replicated at home. Clearly, Dolby Atmos will be very difficult to implement in any kind of home situation because of the way that it works, whereas Auro is surprisingly easy to implement in the home, so that gives it a slight edge in that sense. And obviously, they've got a good relationship with DTS, and they've got a good relationship with Datasat, who do the cinema side of things that DTS used to do. But yeah, would I spend all that money? No, not really. I don't think it was worth it ultimately.
Yeah. So, I mean, at the end of the day, this was for the custom install market. You're talking about 10 grand and above just for the processor. So you can imagine the type of systems that these are designed to go into. And it is perhaps a little bit unfair on us to try and, as enthusiasts, see it in our own systems at this moment in time. It will come eventually, I'm sure of that. It'll all depend on the studio support and so on. But if you've got views on 13.1, 9.1 systems, is it something that you can accommodate in your home cinema or your living room? Is it something that the significant other half is going to fight you over? And at the end of the day, is it that much better than a 7.1 mix or even a 5.1 mix? Is it a priority for you in your system? Let us know in the comments section underneath this podcast. Just to quickly wrap up on the home cinema side of things, Mark, you had a look at the X955-inch 4K from Sony. We've already reviewed the 65. Steve did that, 4 months ago now, Steve?
Back in July.
Back in July, was it?
Was that long ago, really?
Really? As long ago as that. So we've had a look at the 55. It is slightly different to the 65, Mark. What did you find?
Yeah, I think the major difference for 3D fans out there is it doesn't deliver full resolution to each eye. But it's a passive system, much like the 65. But it's just, it's still good. It's still good 3D wise. I'm not the biggest 3D fan anyway, so it's kind of, it didn't really impact my overall sort of verdict on the TV an awful lot. But for big 3D fans, there's a 4K passive. Is just a great experience, and it didn't quite deliver on that. Although it's got some nifty processing tricks up its sleeve to kind of compensate for that. I think, it was a very solid TV with some clever processing tricks. Not sure about the design, the speaker design. I think they've done the right thing in with the wedge shape for the new 2014 sets. I've had quite a lot of people around since it's been here. It's certainly drawn comments from everyone. Most people really don't like it, but I've had a couple around that really love the way it looks. So, I mean, I saw it when the press shots came out, way back now. I thought it looked absolutely gorgeous. But as in home, I find the speakers kind of off-putting. I use external solution anyway, so they're kind of just redundant, even though they do sound good. A good TV, very accurate colours. Sony didn't send me any 4K to watch, so I just had to. I got some stuff stockpiled. Probably shouldn't say where from, and that looked magnificent. The 1080p stuff, Blu-rays looked. Some of them looked more than 1080p at times. Sat very close. Is 4K worth it on a 55-inch? Not really. Not unless you sit 5 foot away. I mean, I've got perfect eyesight pretty much, and I couldn't really see a resolution difference from my normal 7.
Would argue with that. Saying some people would argue that, saying you got perfect eyesight.
Oh, not my optician wouldn't. Take it up with her.
But the thing is, I mean, obviously, sitting further back than 5 feet, I think 7 feet with a 55-inch screen, you should still be able to.
You can just see for the enthusiasts there like that. I would still hang on. I would still I mean, it hasn't got HEVC decoders. That's just one reason not to buy it. Just hold on for a while. There's nothing out there to watch anyway. Just let the technology develop a bit, let the feature sets improve, and wait for the standards to be agreed properly before taking the jump. Would be my advice.
That's
if you have to go out and buy a new TV now, if for any reason you're absolutely compelled to, it's definitely a consideration. But $3,000 for a 55-inch
LED.
LED. It didn't have a lot of the LED problems. It had a bit of dirty screen effect occasionally, but the backlighting was good and the blacks were impressive. But $3,000, you could do better for your money, to be quite honest.
Get a ZT65 for that.
Quickly go and get a ZT65 or even a 55. I mean, an ST60. I would take a Panasonic ST60 for about a third of the cost over this TV for what I can use it for right now.
Very true, Mark. It is something that I think, because we're enthusiasts, because us lot talk about this every week, week in, week out, you tend to forget about just the absolute lack of content. And, is the X9, the model that you've reviewed, the 2013 model, is that even going to be able to have the application for Netflix and so on?
No, there isn't. Outright, no.
So, why would you buy it?
Why would you buy it? Because you're a Sony fan and you just can't wait, basically. Okay,
talking about fanboy stuff, I think the way that Steve's bigged up this Anthem AVR, and I read the review earlier on, and I think you went overboard a little bit. I think you were a bit excited about this product.
It's their new 710, MRX 710 flagship 7-channel AV receiver. It's got the latest version of Anthem correction, which is absolutely superb. It's got a completely redesigned user interface. It's much, much faster. It's got more filters. It's more powerful. It uses the network through an Ethernet cable rather than a serial connector to control it, which obviously makes life a lot simpler as well. It's easy to implement, easy to set up. They've redesigned it so it looks really pretty. I set it up, and I've got to say that the performance on it was absolutely superb. I mean, for a £2,199 AV receiver, it punches well above its weight. I was listening to it not long after I'd been listening to 30 grams worth of data sat, and it was holding its own against that, which is saying something. I'd say that ARC is easily the best of the auto EQ setups at that price point. The only other alternative would be Dirac Live, which is $2,000 just for the process, for the software and the microphone, and that comes with the RS20i. So that's a whole different ballpark. But even then, a lot of the things that they do on the new version of ARC are also done on Dirac Live. So yeah, I thought it was. I think that the Anthem had addressed a lot of the issues from the previous generation of receivers. They'd delivered in terms of performance, in terms of setup, in terms of flexibility, and I've reviewed a lot of receivers now in the sort of $2 to $3,000 price bracket, and for my money, it's the best.
Now, I'm just going to pick you up on the whole data sat holding its own type of thing. You're not seriously saying that this thing competed against 30 grand's worth?
No, I'm saying that given the price differential, it performed really well compared to datasat. Yeah, clearly that's got like 300 watts per channel for a kickoff, and obviously a vastly superior processor and software in it. But given it's 15, it wasn't 15 times as good.
That's all I wanted to clear up there, because I think some people kind of take these things literally, and they think a good example. Just have a look at the review for the Optoma HC91, and a few people getting carried away in that thread, actually thinking that you were saying that it was as good as a 30 grand sim, and they're obviously different products, same technology but different products.
Well, yeah, they're different in terms of like lenses and that, and the build quality and that sort of stuff. But ultimately, it's the same chip inside. Exactly. But things like lenses make a huge difference, and make a huge difference to the price as well. So I think we need to bear that in mind and make that abundantly clear to the people reading that review and this review. So for once on the weekly podcast, we've actually spoken about quite a bit of home cinema.
What's going on?
Which is, I don't know what's going on. So let's fix that straight away, and we're going to games news next. So, Mark, games news. PS4 outselling the Xbox One by 1.5 to 1. Tell us all about this.
Yeah, this was Sony's Fergal Gara talking to Eurogamer. As you say, 1.5 to 1. So, it doesn't sound that much when you put it in, when you ratchet it down to lowest common denominator, but 50% more is a fair old whack, and it's significant simply because the UK was seen as Xbox 360 territory with a similar ratio, which was swung in Microsoft's favour in the last gen. So it kind of undermines. Really, it's not that much of a surprise. It kind of underlines, I should say, how much of a premium we tend to put on price in the UK market. I think most people naturally assume that whichever console with similar lineups of games, whichever console came in at the lower price would be the one that sold, the best, particularly when you consider the amount of features that on the Xbox One are still kind of yet to be rolled out in this territory. And you've also got to take into account, there's also the matter that PS4 was slightly harder to get hold of, so that perhaps makes it a greater achievement. But then it's over the Christmas period, so you've got the kind of whole craze of what's the hardest gift to get hold of and what's the one that's likely to sell out, and people tended to kind of go for that, particularly if they were planning on buying both. People perhaps such as myself, you'd naturally pop down the pre-order on the one that you thought might be selling out. But yeah, it's kind of an early lead for Sony in the UK, and so yeah, just see where it goes from here.
So Xbox One cheaper version on the cards then?
Yes, this was another one of the rumours doing the rounds, which was apparently been confirmed or verified, but it's Microsoft were testing a $399 version of the Xbox One, which had no optical drive. Now, this could either be a kind of harkening back to the original plans with the Xbox One, or it could be simply that are they going to tie it in with cable boxes and turn it into a kind of hybrid device, with proper PVR functionality, particularly in the States where you've got the one guide that can be used by the navigated by the Kinect, and it kind of ties in a lot better with that market. Various sites have received supposed confirmation that Microsoft are readying a new SKU to replace the current one, so not just to sell alongside it, to actually replace it, and that could be out by the end of the year. But those said absolutely nothing about there being no disk drive. So it's a kind of hefty pinch of salt, I think, that anyone would assume that Microsoft would even dare to launch something without an optical drive. It just seems kind of mad, particularly when you consider that it's being touted as the all-in-one solution to throw away Blu-ray playback. Does seem a little bit odd.
$100 for an optical drive. What on the scales they're buying them at? Jesus Christ!
Well, that's the thing. It
doesn't seem right, does it? Get rid of the Kinect. That's what you should be doing, isn't it? Don't get rid of the optical drive.
Yeah, it does make you wonder exactly what else they might be chopping and changing in there. But a new SKU within a year of one launching, it does seem like there might be some kind of radical change. But I don't know. I can't see. This is $399 is the price tag talked about. So I'm assuming that this is for the States and kind of focusing on that. But you would assume that Connect for the various areas where they haven't really utilized it properly, where it's not as tied into the TV system, perhaps might be the thing to be jettisoned.
Seems to make more sense to me, but
Then you don't work for Microsoft.
I don't. Yeah, they're backtracking. They're doing a lot of backtracking all over the place at the minute. So yeah, who knows what they're going to do? Well,
they're talking about working on game prices. The reason why they can't go to kind of all digital is because the game prices, digital downloads, they actually up the prices, which is kind of unheard of. From 45 to 50. So it's a little bit odd to think that they might suddenly then go down that route. They have said recently that they will be kind of taking that under consideration, but the phrase taking something under consideration is a nice way of saying absolutely nothing, so.
Okay, so moving on from Microsoft, a couple of Nintendo things, and I know you're a big Nintendo fan, Mark. Tell us about these.
Yes, this is kind of in the aftermath of all the negativity of the downgraded projected sales figures, and then the hefty whack their share price took. They're now looking to implement a scheme to buy back shares, and their Saturo Iwata's talked about mergers and acquisitions possibly being on the cards. But he's also kind of outlined in just this kind of huge amount of text that's currently doing the rounds as to what he plans to do with the business. And there are lots of things up in the air, lots of things that we never thought we'd hear. But generally, it's as is. They're not leaving the hardware market. They're not going third party. That he emphasized how kind of small they are as a company in comparison to Sony and Microsoft, and that they've got 5,000 employees and they don't have the resources to go toe to toe with them. So they need to find new markets and they have to try to be unique. But he's once again kind of said they can't just cut the price on the Wii U. They're just really unable to sell it properly. And one of the things he did bring up, which was the gamepad, he said that they haven't shown it off properly, or enough people don't understand the value to it. And yet at the same time, we're just about to come up to a month where you're going to have Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze out, which is a fairly big game for in Wii U terms. And the news comes out that it's not even going to use the screen for anything. It's going to be blank while you're playing.
What? Really?
Yeah, it's going to be blank. You can use it as a screen to play the game on, but other than that, it's apparently when it was tested, it was just a blank screen, which just kind of shows that. I mean, from first party titles, the screen has never really been used that much. I mean, he's also. I mean, he outlined they're going to improve the startup time, so they'll roll out some kind of update in the summer. Yeah, exactly.
Buying one.
Yeah. No one's not buying a Wii U because it doesn't start up quick enough. He did touch on smartphones and the idea that they don't want to just release games on that, and they want greater ties with consumers on smart devices. But then he hasn't really said anything that they're planning on doing. He's said there's a development team that won't be barred from releasing games or anything like that, but if it just seems to be going back and forth on the whole issue. The one really good thing is they're looking at pricing structure. He's talked about being flexible and kind of focusing more on rewarding loyal customers. And they did have this 3DS scheme where it was what was it, buy 3 or buy 2 of a certain selection of games, and then you'd get a third free or something that was running. I think
it was one, wasn't it? Because I did it. We bought my daughter for a 3DS XL over Christmas, and it was buy one of a selection of games and download Super Mario, the new Mario 3D World Land, one of them, for free. So,
I did that, but I could have sworn there was another one they did where it was buy 2 and you'd get one from a selection.
If so, I missed that.
Buy 2, get a
too late now as well.
Wii U for free, is it?
Yeah, but beyond that, he's just talked about really kind of shaking things up. He's kind of emphasised that they have to start thinking of different ways of doing things, licensing, possibly characters and IP out to other media. And the interesting point was branching out beyond traditional video games. He talked about looking into the health sphere and talking about quality of life and what he's branding non-wearable technology. Which
non-wearable technology.
Yes, non-wearable.
That's a funny term, isn't it?
I have absolutely no idea, and I'm not fully sure he knows what he's saying. But it's basically one of those things where you've got this tidal wave of negativity heading towards you, and everyone's saying that you're a kind of antiquated institution that's going to kind of die out soon enough and end up just selling small handhelds. And so he had to say something, but ultimately, I don't think he's actually said anything.
Well, I've got an idea for him, because the other two haven't delivered on this. Release a 4K console.
Yeah. Nintendo are still sitting on a fair chunk of change. So they've got a large amount of money, but he did mention the fact that, he was told by Hiroshi Yamauchi that that kind of thing is smart because there will be peaks and troughs, and so therefore during the lean years you want to sit on your money. So that doesn't really sound like a massive risk-taking strategy.
Okay.
It would be an expensive. It would be an expensive console if it did 4K gaming, though. It'd have to have some bloody horsepower.
He has taken a pay cut, though.
That's all right.
Oh well, there you go. You can afford to do a 4K console now. Then, so that's the games news for this week. Games podcast coming up in the next week. Mark, any ideas what you guys are going to be discussing?
I'm fairly sure I'll find a way to bore other people on Nintendo. Beyond that, we've got I don't know, probably picking up It's slim pickings actually at the moment in terms of gaming news, games releases. So I'm fairly sure at some point those of us with PS4s will be trying out Outlast. Has anyone heard of that one? Insanely.
Last out.
No, it's an insanely scary kind of horror game that's being released free. Yeah, on the PS4. And thus far from the games team, everyone has wussed out from playing it.
Oh, is it that scary?
It is. You just want to look at it. The trailer scared me. Really?
I can't play games like
Outlast.
And he's a man who's lived on Japanese horror for years.
Okay, well, that wraps up the games news, and we'll move on swiftly to movies. Now, Steve, before I ask you the question, the title of this movie, and I've seen the trailers, obviously the trailers have been on the TV quite a bit recently because it's just been released, this movie. It's called Lone Survivor. Does that give you any hint at what happens at the end?
Yes, that is the title itself is a spoiler. Although, in fairness, they and if you don't look at the poster and see who the star is, it doesn't take a lot of time to work out who the lone survivor might be.
Yeah, I saw
having
that.
said that, you actually see the film starts with him being rescued. So they actually, in the very, very first scene, show you who the lone survivor is, therefore eliminating any of that. Who is it going to be?
All right, because when I saw it on the TV, it was like, we're going to send a 4-man team in, and then the title of the movie is Lone Survivor. I thought, oh yeah, I can guess what's going to happen.
You can find someone who's going to put money on the other three and buy his hand off.
Titanic did all right.
Yeah. So, Steve, what's at the cinema?
I actually saw 3 films. I saw Lone Survivor, which I'll talk about in more depth. I also saw That Awkward Moment, which is a kind of 20-something romantic comedy with Zac Efron. I say comedy in the broader
right
sense.
up your street then.
Funny.
If it's a 20-something film, then you would have been right out of
I
your
was
league
the
then.
only person in the cinema again. I had the whole thing to myself. Yeah, I mean, I actually don't mind Zac Efron, but he plays a real dick in this film. And I think there's a real problem. There's been quite a lot of films recently where the main characters have been quite unsympathetic, and it is difficult to empathise with a character if you don't like them. I preferred some of his, there was 3 friends basically, and they sort of make a pact not to be in a relationship, and all 3 of them obviously just immediately break it. One of them, one of his friends, gets together with a sort of female friend of his, and that's kind of, it was every cliche in the books in there. The 2 friends, male and female friends, who suddenly realise they actually fancy each other. If you can find anyone who's going to bet money that the main couple won't be together at the end of the film, again, bite their hand off, because clearly they're going to end up together. So there's no real. I can only think of 2 romantic comedies where the couples don't end up together at the end of the film. So not romantic comedies, but just romantic films: Casablanca and 500 Days of Summer. Pretty much every other film I've ever seen, you guaranteed they'll end up together at some point. There'll be obstacles in the path, but eventually they'll get together. So it was charmless, and the characters were pretty unpleasant, and I didn't find it particularly funny. And I don't think I'm alone in that. Well, I was alone, obviously, but I don't think
Lone
the
survivor.
reviews have been particularly good. Then after that, I went and saw Frankenstein, which is an absolute stinker, which was pretty obvious by the fact that A, it had no advanced press screenings, and B, it's been delayed for a year, whilst they A, turned it into a 3D film. 3D was very poor, by the way, and then digitally remastered it and made it into an IMAX film. Talk about polishing a turd. No amount of digital remastering, 3D or big screen projections are going to make any difference to this. It's bloody awful. They couldn't even get the fact that the monster is not called Frankenstein right. The title's wrong, because it should be I Monster or I Creature. Frankenstein's the guy who created the monster. The monster is just the monster. Although a lot of people obviously get that wrong, but it really pissed me off that they couldn't even get that right. It was pretty. It's basically, if you've seen, it's written by or produced and written by the same team that produced and wrote the Underworld movie. So if you've seen those, you know what to expect. That's got vampires and werewolves fighting a sort of war, and mankind's largely unaware of it. This has got angels and demons fighting a war, and Frankenstein's in the middle of it, or Frankenstein's monster, should I say, is in the middle of it. And yeah, it is. It's very strange and a bit silly, to be honest. So give that a miss. And then I saw Lone Survivor, which has its good points and it's obviously based on a true story. Annoyingly, though, they change things in the film. You kind of think, well, if you want to make a really realistic, war film, because some of the battle sequences are genuinely well done and quite realistic and brutal and graphic. And that was good. But, you think, well, if you're going to make the film, stick to the true story, because in the real story, The Lone Survivor, is paralyzed from the waist down from his injuries and has to literally crawl his way out of the battle zone by drawing a line in the ground with his knife and then dragging himself over the line and then drawing another line. And that kind of brute will to survive is interesting. Whereas they just got Marky Mark wandering out on with a bit of a limp in the film. They have a whole battle between the Taliban and the Pakistan, Afghani villagers who protect him, which never happened. The number of Taliban involved in the firefight varies from 8 to 10 to 25 to 30, but there's at least 100 in the film. It just feels like, if you're going to do it properly or don't do it at all. So that kind of annoyed me. It is very gung-ho and very American and very pro the Navy SEALs that are in there. And there's lots of shots of the real guys, photographs at the end of them all. But the performances are genuinely very good from the 4 guys who go on the mission, and which is Taylor Kitsch, Ben Foster, Mark Wahlberg, and Emil Hirsch. And as I said, the action scenes are really well done. I know that Chris absolutely jizzed himself over it in his review, which is not a massive surprise, frankly.
Oh no, that's right up his street, isn't it? That film,
Yeah.
Ex-Marine. It plays exactly to what he loves in the film. So. Yeah,
Chris is an ex-Marine.
Yeah, so,
Didn't you know that?
So he tells
That
us.
explains a lot. Yeah, right. That explains a lot. Yeah, no, I mean, it's yes, it's okay. It's certainly not as good as Chris makes it out to be, unless maybe you're an ex-Navy SEAL or Marine. Maybe you enjoy it. But it's certainly a passable. I just kind of felt the film didn't quite know what it wanted to be. Was it trying to condone war and show how horrible it is, or was it trying to glorify these soldiers? Because it was doing a bit of both at certain times, which kind of sent out mixed messages. But it is a well-made film, certainly.
Lots of buffed up men in it for you, Steve, was there?
Yeah, there's lots of. That's probably why Chris liked it. There's lots of very large Navy SEAL guys and all big muscles and and beards. Got beards too. Everyone's got a beard for some reason. I think they all grow
Well, because it's the Taliban.
No. I meant the Navy SEALs. The Navy SEAls apparently are allowed to grow beards. They're the only part of the armed forces that can. So they all do to make a point. I'd be buggered if that was the case because I can't even grow. Well, I'd be literally buggered probably, but I can't grow a beard to save my life.
Flat yourself, Steve.
Okay, score on that one.
I'd give it sort of 7 rather than I think the 9 that Chris gave it. I'd give it 7. The other two would get like 4.
Right. Okay. Let's move on quickly because we are running out of time. Blu-ray is released this week. About Time, The Prisoners, Runner, The Vikings Season 1, and Bates Motel Season 1. Got to say, even though you have reviewed some of these, Steve, on the podcast, I don't know anything about them. So which one did you pick out as must-buys?
If I was going to pick, I would pick About Time, which is a Richard Curtis film about a time-traveling young guy and his father, which I thought was a really sweet movie. Made me cry at the end. It's all about sort of relationship between fathers and sons, and it's really, really good. Prisoners is excellent too. It's got a slightly pat ending, but for the majority of the film, it's really tense and really well acted by people like Hugh Jackman and Jake Gyllenhaal. So that's definitely worth seeing. Those two. I haven't seen The Vikings and I haven't seen Bates Motel. I did see Runner. It's okay, but just a mediocre film. But the first two, About Time and Prisoners, definitely worth checking out.
And our movies editor, which one would you pick, Simon?
Yes. I would probably agree with Steve there. Although I haven't seen About Time, I'm under orders to see it. So I will be seeing that, and I'll probably take the Blu-ray and review it. Kaz has looked at Prisoners, and I have seen that, and that is, as a Blu-ray, excellent. Rather dour picture, but then it's meant to be. Fantastic sound, but an excellent film and very morally ambiguous. And if you have children, you kind of question, would you go as far as the character does to find his child? So it makes you question your own morals. So by that standard, it's well worth seeing. I haven't seen the other two series, although I do have Bates Motel downstairs, still in its wrapper. But I will be looking at that, and I can report back on that. I don't know, a couple of months' time.
Well, that's the thing. I was going to pick up on these two because these are two series that I don't know much about, and I haven't seen that much promotion of them either. So, any of you guys seen these series?
I haven't. No, as I said, I haven't seen it, but I know about it. It's a prequel. Much. You have you seen Hannibal yet? Do you know Hannibal?
Yeah.
The prequel to The Silence of the Lambs. Well, Bates Motel is very much in the same mould. It's a prequel to the film Psycho, showing how Norman Bates became Norman Bates, the psycho of the film. supposed to
You're
be
just giving away the ending of
reasonably
Psycho.
Oh my God!
I think that's all right.
You bastard.
A 60-year-old film.
Yeah, I think we can give
okay.
away spoilers on a 60-year-old film. I think we're okay on that one. The other one that's interesting, Vikings. There's a lot of these at the minute. Games of Thrones, and Spartacus and that kind of thing. I'm assuming it's along the same lines. Lots of tits and battles and stuff.
Yeah, for the first 10 minutes I saw, I watched 10 minutes on Love Film, which doesn't mean it was bad. I quite enjoyed it, I think, but it was very late at night, and then I've since not gone back to it. But yeah, it's exclusive on Love Film, so if you want to sign up for a trial membership to give it a spin before you buy it, might be worth an idea. Or you could buy the Blu-ray.
Did it have nudity and violence?
Yeah. In the first 10 minutes, there was lots of that.
I just asked that, Steve. You weren't listening.
Oh, I wasn't quite sure. I wanted Mark to be specific here. He wasn't okay.
Yes.
Yeah,
Steve,
we can go
Can you
into
be
within
explicit?
bits and blood.
Yeah, we can do that off air. Let's move on quickly. Another series which I never got into was 24. Never got into it, never watched any of it, and it's something I always meant to. I've got the Blu-ray box sets of the first 2 seasons and never bothered to watch them. But seemingly it's coming back, Steve.
Yeah, I mean, there's been season 9, was it 8 or 9 that finished?
Yeah.
9, yeah, season 9 back in 2010, I think it finished. And there was a for quite a long time they were trying to make a feature film, and at one point Tony Scott was going to direct it, obviously before he committed suicide, and that kind of fell through for reasons I'm not quite sure why. Maybe they couldn't get a decent script together. And there's been
an hour
talk
and a half, wouldn't it? The film wouldn't have been the same. 120 minutes.
It hasn't got to take 24 hours. It could just be called 24. This new
But that's
series
the hook of the show, isn't it? The show takes place over a day.
But they were trying to
hours.
do. It looks like this series is morphed from that, because I remember reading about this sort of proposed film, and it would have taken place in Europe with Jack Bauer on the run and everything like that, and that fell through. But now it looks like they have just started production this week on this new series, which is only a 12-parter. So I guess it would be 12 rather than
12.
24 Live Another Day. It is set in Europe because they're shooting in London right now, and there was a teaser shown during the Super Bowl last night. And so I'm quite excited about this because I love a bit of Jack Bauer. You can't beat Keith for killing people and torturing people left, right, and centre. Anyone who's still alive from the original series, the original 9 series, is I think in this, but that's not many people, by the way. Most people get killed at some point. But they've got the old crew back. They've got Chloe and Jack, and they're in Europe. And I think it starts in May on Fox. I don't know who'll be showing it here. Probably be Sky, because they showed the original series.
Well, Fox is on Sky now, so
yeah. Well, there you go. Then it'll be Sky, which is annoying. But I'll get it on DVD or watch it on Netflix or something when it comes out. But I'm excited about that. I'm looking forward to that.
Okay. First trailer for Seth MacFarlane's new comedy, A Million Ways to Die in the West. So I went and had a look at this. I love Seth MacFarlane. I love Family Guy. I really enjoyed Ted. I looked at the trailer and I'm thinking, my God, this is going to be a pile of shit.
Really? I thought it was really funny.
Oh, it just, I don't know what it
Hang
is.
on, which trailer did you watch? Did you watch the red band trailer or the green band trailer?
I watched the...
Was there any swearing in it?
I can't remember now. There's lots of people dying in it, which obviously goes
that's
along...
kind of a running joke, isn't it?
which obviously it's why it's called A Million Ways to Die. But
Really
I don't know. It just every scene that they've chosen in that trailer fell flat for me. It just, I don't know what it was. I don't think it's going to be very good.
It's quite funny in the trailer. It's got a good cast. It's got Seth MacFarlane, Charlize Theron, Amanda Seyfried, Neil Patrick Harris, and Liam Neeson. And Liam Neeson, he's always a winner in comedy, isn't he? I'm trying to think what comedy. No, he's really funny in Life's Too Short, taking the mickey out of himself, where he's talking about being a funny guy, but he's clearly not.
I've got to say, with all the trailers that were shown last night. Obviously, we're recording this Monday night. Last night was Super Bowl in the States, and obviously most people watch the Super Bowl for the adverts because that's the big that's the big thing. They pay so much money for these adverts that companies do go out of their way. And I've been looking through all the adverts that were shown last night on YouTube, and there weren't that many funny ones. I mean, the Matrix one for Kia was okay. The one with Budweiser with the dog and the horse, that was strange. Trying to come up with some kind of best buddy type tagline for that, which is strange. But even all the trailers that were shown, RoboCop, Need for Speed, that you've listed here, Captain America, Spider-Man 2, Transformers 4, there's nothing there that would make me go to the cinema.
I thought, well, I don't know about the teasers they showed you on Super Bowl, but the trailer, the actual proper trailer I saw for Captain America looked really good. Spider-Man 2, I couldn't really care less about. It just seems to be full of villains, and I always get concerned when there's more villains than there are heroes. Transformers 4, well, who cares about that? I mean, God, I can't believe they're making a fourth one. Need for Speed is a video game, isn't it, Mark? Yep. So they never work out very well. RoboCop, PG-13. So, I mean, it opens on Friday. I'm going to go and see it. It might be okay, I suppose, but I do find the fact that it's PG-13 worrying.
Yeah, more for you. But then you've got to go and see this shit, so we don't have to, you know. So, yeah, exactly. You go and see it, so we don't have to. So there you go. I don't know if anybody else watched the Super Bowl, but that was the most one-sided game I've ever seen in my life. It was over in 20 minutes, and the thing that really wound me up this year, and the Americans do this all the time, they overhype everything, but the whole way they were selling it as the greatest show on earth, it's like, well, bollocks, anybody outside America, A, doesn't know the rules, and B, either watches it for the halftime show, which was really poor this year, Red Hot Chili Peppers, and that Mars guy, is it Bruno Mars?
Bruno Mars, yeah.
Oh, bloody awful. So that was appalling. And then, like I say, I mean, some of the highlights were these adverts, but then, even then, some of them were bloody strange. Anybody else watch the Super Bowl?
Did we fuck?
No, afraid not.
Yeah,
I'm not sure. I think
I actually wouldn't mind American football if it was condensed into, an hour and a half, the whole
Yeah,
thing.
all the
It's
bloody
sitting there for
advert
3 or 4 hours. Yeah, it's good God. How can you've got 32 seconds to go, and that can last 6 or 7 minutes.
It looks to be a distraction to eating.
Yeah. So they can stuff as much.
Well, actually, when
the game is a distraction to advert breaks.
Yeah, well, the thing was, the playoff games were on when we were at CES in Vegas. So what you found was at the weekends, we were there for 2 Saturdays anyway, and what you found was that a lot of people come into town for the games. They come into the casinos and stuff, and they sit and watch the games there, and there's a good atmosphere and all the rest of it. So I can see it as a group thing. That's their thing to do. It's the most popular sport in the States. So, and like I say, I mean, these guys come from miles and miles. There was loads of 49ers fans on the second Saturday. We were there for the playoff game that was on, and it is a good atmosphere, and you hear them all cheering and all the rest of it, and I can get the social side of it. But like you say, Mark, it's the whole game time is 60 minutes, but it takes 4.5 hours to complete a game. It's just it's an interesting game. And some of the hits and all the rest of it, you think, my God, and the size of some of these guys. But like you say, I mean, if they condensed it down to 90 minutes, I think it'd be a far better spectacle. And as always, it was just overhyped to hell. It really was.
Yes,
So.
The hype in it has been the New York, the first Super Bowl in New York, but it wasn't, was it? It was in New Jersey.
Yeah, well, the borough of New York. that was how they were getting round that one.
I think the greatest show on earth will be in summer when we get to the World Cup, for the rest of the world at least.
We see, that's very true. It was odd. I don't know if anybody remembers the World Cup that was held in the States.
Yeah,
1994. Well, England weren't there, so no, I don't.
The only thing I ever really remember about that was the Ireland game with John Aldridge swearing.
Yeah, John Aldridge, yeah, I remember that. That's one. And the Italians missed
Baggio missing that penalty.
Yeah.
The final was an absolute damp squib, but wasn't it? It was a good tournament.
Yeah. But sometimes that happens with the tournaments. You find that the finals are really, really boring because nobody wants to lose the final, do they?
Yeah.
You get all the way there, the last thing you want to do is lose it. But, that one was held in the States, and there was absolutely no interest at all in it. The people that were filling the stadiums, they were European, South Americans.
Hispanics.
Yeah. So, anyway, that's all we've got time for on this week's podcast. My thanks to Steve Withers.
Chinaman peed on my rug.
Mark Botwright.
It's a league game, Smokey.
Simon Crust.
The rug really tied the room together.
And Mark Hodgkinson.
At least I'm housebroken.
You can follow us on Twitter, and don't forget you can also like us on Facebook. Plus, why not leave us a rating on iTunes if you enjoyed the show, or leave us a comment under the podcast in the podcast forum. I'm Phil Hinton. Thanks very much for listening, and we'll see you again next Wednesday.